In this next section, they talk about the ways in which language does things, or they call it language as action, or the things that language does in the world, other than just convey meaning. Taking us to Wittgenstein. What does this mean, though? Language is a game with rules. He said it made sense if you think deeply about it. It does sound like some of those things that the more you think about it, the more it makes sense, or then it doesn't make sense when it's the light of day. But the idea, I think, is that it's not just the meaning of things, it's not just the literal interpretation, but what are able to do with that. And so this developed into something that they call speech act theory, which is basically that when we use words, when we use language, we are not just conveying information. Again, this happens in school where we make a lot of propositional statements like Paris is the capital of France, but in most of our lives, we're not trying to convey information. We're trying to make somebody do something or produce some sort of action in the world. And so a lot of language use has a different function than simply conveying information. For example, gossip, which is a way of conveying information. In many different societies, you might not think gossip is important, but gossip has a role. It may not be true, the information might not be exactly right, but what it does is in many ways, is when you gossip about somebody, you're trying to say what somebody should be doing, and you're enforcing social norms. Those of you who may have grown up in small towns may know the force of gossip to keep people in line and to keep them from doing things that other people don't want them to do. Or those of you who are in small colleges might know that gossip circulates about certain people and creates different social norms. Who does gossip often circulate more about in small colleges? Serves to try and put people into different social norms. How does that work? Who gets subjected to gossip? Oftentimes. I don't know. Maybe it's changed over the years. Do you think young women or young men are more subjected to the gossip of social norms about their activities? We know the why, because we live in a sexist society and it's still that way. But the how is, right, you create something that may or may not be true, gossip about a certain person, and then all of a sudden that person finds it more difficult to move in the world, or they move into a situation or a room and everybody's looking at them all of a sudden. So it draws attention to somebody. It doesn't always work. Sometimes people rebel against these social norms, but it does have that function. Talks about how another way in which language is used as social action is as an identity marker. How people have different ways of talking can index or point to different identities which they are trying to achieve or are signaling that they are being correct in a certain context. There's an interesting example here, which the linguists call language registers. Based on the situation of who you're around, words or a thing can have different words. Now, this is often applied, or it's often very visible in East Asian languages. So they give you the example of Japanese, different words for eating based on your social context. I remember when I was trying to learn Korean because of my wife's family, it was very clear that the word to eat, if you're just talking about eating with your friends, you use one word, but you would never say that to your father. You'd only use the honorific word, totally different word for how to eat. And so in these languages, these registers are often very pronounced. Now, probably in English, we do have some of these, what you might call the informal register, the ways in which you are with your friends versus the ways you talk in a class, or maybe in the old days, people used to talk to their parents, you'd use different levels of formality. But some languages take this to the extent that there are whole different words or registers or even a home language versus a business language. And so the people that speak one way in the home and one way outside of the home. And this is a way in which language can be different according to, it's another form of language variation within a language. There's another example of language as social action, which comes toward the end of the section that we read for today on page 210, where they talk about the ways in which language is used to create associations with certain groups of people, and especially politically. And I want to read this to you because it's just very striking. So it's the linguistic anthropologist Susan Gall, and there was a political party in Hungary, in Europe, and they were trying to challenge these ideas about immigration. So in political writings, campaign literature, and public speeches, this party began to refer to the Romani, the Roma community, as gypsy, a known pejorative ethnonym. So we may not know this, but Romani is in Europe a community of people who have been very stigmatized. And the word gypsy is actually a pejorative term, which you're not supposed to use about people, but people still use it. This party also began to use the terms gypsy-criminals and gypsy crime. In this way, the party's discourse about gypsy criminals served effectively to turn them into criminals in the perception of many Hungarians, and so bolstered public support for their own policies. Simple phrases that sit comfortably within local language ideologies, it is possible to transform a group merely through language associating them with criminality. So you have this group, which has always already often and for a long time been stigmatized. It was one of the groups that Hitler in Germany wanted to get rid of as well. They are referred to pejoratively, and in this sense, they started using these words together in order to associate this group with criminality in the political sphere. This sound familiar? Sound like anything that's happening today? Should, because we're seeing this very same political discourse. So when I use a word like undocumented migrants, people that are coming to, for example, the United States because they are trying to work, do not have proper documents, that's one way of referring to people. If you refer to people as illegal aliens or illegals, it creates a different association with your mind with people. And so you always have to ask, whenever you hear language, what is this language attempting to accomplish? What is somebody trying to do by associating these terms or these words? And so you're going to hear a lot of things. Probably I've already heard a lot of things. For example, that all these undocumented migrants are going to be voting. Now think about this. If you are an undocumented migrant, are you going to want to vote? No fucking way. I'm going to go in and risk getting a felony for something that most people in America don't even bother to do? Why am I, as an undocumented migrant just trying to work a fucking job, going to go in and risk all that for nothing? Think about it. They might want to vote. Sure, everybody wants to vote, but you'd have to be crazy to walk in there and risk getting a felony and getting officially deported just for casting a ballot that probably isn't going to matter. It's insane. So when people use these terms, just try to think, what is this person trying to do? What kinds of ideas are they trying to associate with people, with a group? How is this acting to create people as human people or dehumanize people, which is what we often do with language across gender, across race, and across international boundaries. Just keep your eye on that.